The pen moved across the paper before Naomi could stop it. Marcus smiled, that same warm, practiced smile he used on investors, and pressed the tip of the pen into the deed. Ink bled into the paper. His signature curled at the end the way it always did, confident, unbothered, final. Across the table, Vanessa Cole sat frozen, her champagne glass trembling slightly in her hand. Her eyes darted toward the door, toward Naomi, toward anywhere but Marcus's face. Naomi stood in the doorway of her own dining room, car keys still in her fist, breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. She had driven 90 miles an hour down the Sam Houston tollway to get here. She had run 2 red lights. She had left her heels in the car because she couldn't run in them fast enough. She was still too late. Marcus set the pen down gently, like a man finishing a business deal instead of destroying his marriage, and looked up. His eyes met Naomi's. He didn't flinch. He didn't look guilty. He looked relieved. Finally, he whispered, loud enough for her to hear across the room. "I'm free." Vanessa's face went pale. She wasn't supposed to be holding a deed. She wasn't supposed to be sitting at this table at all, not really. 24 hours earlier, she had been a stranger to this house, a stranger to this family, a stranger to the entire life she had just been dragged into. Because 24 hours earlier, Naomi had paid her $5,000 to do one simple thing. Flirt with Marcus. Test his loyalty. Report back. No kissing. No dating. No real feelings involved. Now Naomi's house, the home she had built, the home she had paid for, sat signed over to a woman her husband had known for a single day. Naomi's knees went weak. Her stomach dropped like the elevator in Marcus's downtown office building, the one that always made her ears pop. She looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked terrified, not triumphant. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked proud. And in that single frozen second, standing barefoot in her own foyer with her car keys biting into her palm, Naomi understood something that turned her blood to ice. The little loyalty test she had designed to catch a cheating husband had somehow spiraled into the most expensive, most humiliating mistake of her entire life. But she had no idea yet, none of them did, that the biggest liar in that room wasn't the actress she had hired. And before another 72 hours passed, someone in that house was going to leave in handcuffs. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Asterisk asterisk. 3 weeks earlier, nobody in Houston would have believed a single word of what was coming. Naomi and Marcus Brooks were the couple everyone in their circle quietly envied. They had the kind of marriage people pointed to at weddings and said, "That's what I want." Naomi, 42, was a sharp, composed corporate attorney with a downtown office on the 31st floor and a reputation for never losing a negotiation. Marcus, 45, was a real estate investor with a smile that opened doors and closed deals, the kind of man who remembered everyone's name at a gala and made them feel like the most important person in the room. They attended church together every Sunday. They hosted dinner parties in their Memorial area home that people begged invitations to. They posted anniversary photos that made their friends sigh with jealousy. On paper, on Instagram, in the pews of Windsor Village, they were perfect. But paper doesn't show everything. For the past several months, Naomi had started noticing things. Small things. The kind of things a woman convinces herself she's imagining until she can't anymore. Marcus's phone, which used to sit face up on the kitchen counter while he cooked breakfast, now lived face down. Always face down, like it had developed a sudden fear of sunlight. There were business meetings that stretched until midnight, meetings he never mentioned beforehand and rarely discussed afterward. There were purchases, a new watch here, a weekend trip there, that appeared with no explanation and a vague, dismissive wave of the hand when she asked, "Just work stuff, baby." You wouldn't want the details anyway. She wanted the details. She was a lawyer. She lived on details. One night, Naomi sat across from him at dinner, watching him laugh at something on his phone, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years of marriage. Not sadness, not yet. Suspicion. Cold, clinical suspicion, the same feeling she got in a courtroom right before she caught a witness in a lie. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Naomi didn't operate on feelings. She operated on evidence. That was where Uncle Bayo came in. Uncle Bayo was 67 years old, loud in every sense of the word, and had never once in his life filtered a single thought before it left his mouth. He had immigrated from Lagos decades ago, built a modest trucking business in Houston, and now spent his retirement showing up unannounced at Naomi's house with strong opinions and stronger pepper soup. He arrived that Thursday evening carrying a pot wrapped in a kitchen towel and immediately sensed something was wrong the moment he stepped through the door. "Why is your face looking like tax season?" he asked, setting the pot down on the counter. Naomi tried to wave him off. "I'm fine, Uncle." "You are not fine. Fine people don't stir soup, they're not cooking." He pointed at the wooden spoon in her hand, hovering uselessly over an empty pot. "Talk to me." So she told him, carefully, clinically, the late nights, the face-down phone, the unexplained purchases. She laid it out the way she'd lay out a case file, dates, patterns, inconsistencies. Uncle Bayo listened, nodding slowly, stroking his chin like a judge preparing a verdict. "You need a private investigator," he finally said. "I thought about it." "No, don't do that." He shook his head firmly. "Private investigators are expensive and slow, and they take pictures of the wrong car for 2 weeks before they realize it's not even his car." Naomi laughed despite herself. "So what do you suggest, Uncle?" He leaned back in his chair, a mischievous grin spreading across his face, the same grin he'd had since he was a boy in Lagos causing trouble in his mother's kitchen. "Actors," he said simply. "What?" "Actors, Naomi. People who lie for a living, professionally, with training. Why pay a detective to follow him around with a camera when you can pay an actress to walk right up to him and see what he does?" Naomi opened her mouth to dismiss the idea immediately. It was absurd. It was reckless. It was the kind of idea that belonged in a soap opera, not in the life of a woman who billed $350 an hour for her legal opinion. But she didn't dismiss it. Instead, she picked up a pen and wrote something down on the notepad she kept by the stove, the same notepad she used for grocery lists and court deadlines. "Hire an actress." She stared at the words for a long moment. "Naomi," Uncle Bayo said, watching her face change. "I was joking." "I know," she said quietly, "but it's actually not a bad idea." Uncle Bayo blinked. Then he laughed so hard he had to sit down. I create monsters everywhere I go." Naomi didn't laugh with him. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead, the way she did in every negotiation of her professional life. If Marcus was faithful, this would prove it, and she could let go of the suspicion eating at her. If he wasn't, she would finally have the proof she needed instead of a stomach full of gut feelings a courtroom would never accept. She had no idea that the plan would work, just not in any way she could have imagined. Vanessa Cole had been in Houston for 11 months, and every single one of them had been a fight. She'd moved from Atlanta chasing a dream that felt smaller every week, a stage career that kept promising to bloom and kept dying on the vine instead. Small theater roles, background work on commercials nobody would remember, a callback for a national ad campaign that went to someone else at the very last minute, someone with better connections and a smaller waistline, according to the casting director, who didn't even bother lowering her voice. Vanessa was 34 years old, talented in a way that frustrated her because nobody seemed to notice, and 2 months behind on rent for a studio apartment that smelled permanently like the neighbor's cooking. She had a stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter that she'd started using as a coaster because at least then they were serving some purpose. So when a woman calling herself Naomi Brooks reached out through a casting network with a strange, oddly specific request, Vanessa didn't hesitate long before agreeing to meet. They met at a quiet coffee shop in the Galleria area. Naomi arrived in a tailored blazer, looking every inch the powerful attorney she was, and slid a folder across the table like she was presenting evidence in court. "I need someone to run a scenario," Naomi said carefully. "A performance. Nothing illegal. Nothing that involves anything physical." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, already skeptical. She'd heard enough strange offers in this industry to know when to be cautious. "I'm listening. My husband. I need to know if he's faithful. I want you to approach him, accidentally, naturally, strike up a conversation, flirt a little, see how he responds. Report back to me exactly what happens. That's it. No dates. No kissing. No physical contact of any kind. Just enough to see if he takes the bait." Vanessa studied her for a long moment. "You want me to be bait?" "I want you to be an actress," Naomi corrected. "Playing a role. That's all this is. And if he doesn't take the bait, then I apologize to him for doubting him. And you walk away $5,000 richer." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly at the number. $5,000 would cover 2 months of rent, her overdue car payment, and the acting workshop she'd been eyeing for months but couldn't afford. And if he does take the bait? Naomi's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes hardened. Then I'll know exactly who I'm married to. Vanessa hesitated. Something about this felt like it was standing on the edge of a line she shouldn't cross. But then she thought about the stack of bills doubling as coasters on her kitchen counter, and she thought about how tired she was of being broke while chasing a dream that never seemed to chase her back. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. Naomi nodded once, satisfied, like she'd just closed a deal. Good. I'll be in touch with the details. Vanessa watched her walk out of the coffee shop with the same brisk, controlled energy she'd walked in with, and for a brief moment, a small warning bell rang somewhere in the back of Vanessa's mind. She ignored it. She needed the money too badly to listen. Naomi engineered the accidental meeting with the precision of a woman who'd spent 2 decades building airtight legal cases. She knew Marcus's schedule better than he did. Every Thursday evening, he stopped at a rooftop lounge downtown after his final property showing, ordering the same bourbon, sitting at the same corner of the bar, checking his phone every few minutes like he was expecting something important that never came. Vanessa arrived at the lounge that Thursday in a deep red dress, hair styled loose around her shoulders, carrying herself with the practiced confidence of a woman who'd spent years learning how to fill a room without saying a word. She sat 2 stools down from Marcus and ordered a glass of wine. It took him 4 minutes to speak to her. That's a bold color for a Thursday, he said, nodding toward her dress. Vanessa turned, offering the smile she'd rehearsed a dozen times in her bathroom mirror the night before. Bold colors are the only ones worth wearing. Marcus laughed, a genuine laugh, warm and easy, and slid 1 stool closer. Within 20 minutes, they were deep in conversation about real estate, about Houston's skyline, about nothing and everything. Vanessa played her part flawlessly, laughing at his jokes, letting her eyes linger just a beat too long, letting the conversation breathe with the kind of tension that made a man feel like he was the most interesting person in the room. She reported back to Naomi later that night, sitting in her car in the parking garage, texting furiously. Asterisk, he's friendly. Flirty, but not aggressive. Nothing crazy yet. We'll keep you posted. Asterisk. Naomi read the message 3 times before setting her phone down, unsure whether she felt relieved or disappointed. What neither woman anticipated was how quickly Marcus would escalate. By the second meeting, another accidental run-in Naomi orchestrated at a charity auction the following week. Marcus had transformed completely. He arrived wearing cologne so strong Vanessa could smell it from across the room, a scent he'd clearly bought specifically for this moment. His hair was freshly cut. His shoes were new. He'd clearly been practicing something, because his lines came out slightly too rehearsed, slightly too smooth, like a man who'd spent the week watching dating advice videos on his phone at 2 in the morning. He ordered champagne and mispronounced it so badly the bartender had to ask him to repeat himself twice. Vanessa had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. You clean up nice, she told him instead, playing along. I clean up for the right occasion, Marcus said, leaning in closer than necessary. And this feels like the right occasion. From a distance, partially hidden behind a pillar near the auction's silent bidding table, Naomi watched the entire exchange with her stomach twisting into knots. She'd expected mild flirtation. She'd expected maybe a lingering glance, a slightly too long handshake, something small enough to either forgive or confront with a clear conscience. She had not expected her husband to look at a stranger the way he used to look at her 15 years ago, back when they were young and broke and stupidly, dizzyingly in love. She told herself it was still under control. She told herself this was still just a test. She had no idea Marcus was about to blow the entire experiment apart. 3 days later, Vanessa called Naomi in a panic, her voice shaking through the phone. He's talking about leaving you, she said, breathless. Naomi, this isn't flirting anymore. He told me. He's trapped in a miserable marriage. He said you control everything. He said he's been waiting for someone like me his whole life. Naomi sat frozen at her kitchen table, phone pressed hard against her ear. That's insane. We've been happy. He also said, Vanessa cut in, her voice tightening, that he wants to introduce me to his attorney. The room went silent except for the ticking of the clock above Naomi's stove. His attorney, Naomi repeated slowly. Why would he introduce you to his attorney? I don't know, Vanessa said. But Naomi, I don't like this. This doesn't feel like a game anymore. Naomi didn't sleep that night. She sat in her home office long after Marcus had gone to bed, staring at nothing, replaying every conversation she'd ever had with her husband, searching for the moment their marriage had quietly rotted from the inside without her noticing. She woke up the next morning to a text message that made her blood run cold. It was a photo. Marcus, standing in a law office she didn't recognize, holding a stack of documents. Vanessa beside him, smiling nervously, clearly uncomfortable, clearly out of her depth. Naomi didn't wait for coffee. She grabbed her keys and drove. She didn't know exactly what she was racing toward. She just knew, with the kind of certainty that comes from 20 years of reading people for a living, that something had gone terribly wrong. She arrived at their house to the scene that would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. Marcus at the dining table, pen in hand, the deed to their home sliding across polished wood toward a woman she had hired for $5,000 to test his loyalty. By the time Naomi's car keys hit the counter, the deed was already signed. Finally, Marcus had whispered, "I'm free." And Naomi stood there, barefoot, breathless, staring at the wreckage of a plan that had spiraled completely, catastrophically out of her control. If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still here," if you're still watching up to now. Let's see who's still with us, because trust me, the biggest twist hasn't happened yet. Asterisk asterisk. The silence in the dining room stretched unbearably before Naomi finally found her voice. "You signed our house away," she said, each word deliberate, controlled, dangerous. "To a woman you've known for a week." Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment before he rebuilt it, brick by brick. "Naomi, I know how this looks." "Do you?" Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. 20 years of courtroom composure, and this man had unraveled her in under 60 seconds. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my husband just gave away the roof over our heads to a complete stranger." "She's not a stranger," Marcus said, reaching for Vanessa's hand across the table. "She understands me in ways you stopped trying to years ago." Vanessa yanked her hand back like his touch had burned her. "Marcus, stop." He blinked at her, confused. "What? Stop," Vanessa repeated, her voice rising, panic bleeding into every syllable. This wasn't supposed to go this far. This was never supposed to be real. Marcus's face shifted through confusion, then disbelief, then something colder. "What are you talking about?" Naomi stepped further into the room, arms crossed, every muscle in her body coiled tight. "Tell him, Vanessa. Tell him the truth. All of it." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "I'm an actress. Naomi hired me, weeks ago, to see if you'd cheat. It was supposed to be flirting. That's it, nothing real. I never asked for a house. I never wanted any of this." The color drained from Marcus's face in real time, like watching a photograph fade in the sun. "You." He turned to Naomi, his jaw tightening. "You hired someone? You hired someone to seduce me." "I hired someone to test you," Naomi corrected, her voice shaking with fury now, all pretense of composure gone. "And you failed spectacularly, Marcus. You didn't just flirt. You confessed to wanting to leave me. You brought her to a lawyer. You signed away our house." "Our house," Marcus repeated bitterly, laughing without humor. "This has never felt like our anything. Every decision, every dollar, every choice in this marriage has gone through you first. I was done asking permission to be a man in my own home. So your solution was to give it away to a woman you met a week ago?" "My solution," Marcus snapped, "was to finally take something back." Vanessa stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I want no part of this. I want the money you promised me, Naomi, and I want to go home. I never signed up for felony-adjacent chaos." "Nobody's going anywhere," Naomi said, her lawyer instincts kicking in through the emotional wreckage. "Not until I understand exactly what just happened in my dining room." The room fell into a tense, ugly silence. 3 people staring at each other across a table that held a piece of paper capable of destroying at least 2 of their lives. What none of them knew yet, what Naomi wouldn't discover until the following morning, hunched over her laptop at 3 in the morning with reading glasses perched on her nose and a legal pad covered in furious notes, was that the signature on that deed meant absolutely nothing at all, because Marcus never actually owned the house. The chaos that followed consumed the entire household for the next several days. Naomi confronted Vanessa first, cornering her in the guest bathroom, where she'd fled to splash cold water on her face and collect herself. "Why didn't you tell me things were escalating?" Naomi demanded. "You said friendly. You said flirty, but not aggressive. You didn't say he was planning to leave me." "Because it happened fast," Vanessa said, voice trembling. "One conversation he's talking about the weather, the next he's telling me he loves me and wants to build a life with me. I've never seen anything like it. It was like watching someone perform a role they'd already memorized before I even walked in the door." Naomi paused at that, something cold sliding down her spine. "What do you mean, memorized?" "I mean it felt rehearsed," Vanessa said slowly. "Like he'd said those exact words to someone before. More than once." Naomi didn't answer. She just stood there, turning that sentence over in her mind like a stone she couldn't skip across water. Nobody in the house trusted anyone else after that. Naomi began locking her office door. Marcus started sleeping in the guest room, though he insisted it was because he needed space, not because he was avoiding his wife's questions. Vanessa, unable to leave until she was paid and unable to stay without feeling like a hostage, wandered the house like a ghost, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. Uncle Bayo showed up 2 days later, uninvited as always, carrying another pot of soup and immediately sensing the poisonous energy hanging over the house like storm clouds. "What happened here?" he asked, setting the pot down slowly. "It smells like betrayal in this kitchen." Naomi filled him in, every detail, watching his expression shift from amusement to genuine alarm as the story unfolded. "So my joke," Uncle Bayo said slowly, "actually became your life. Your joke became a nightmare, Uncle." He sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "I only meant hire someone to flirt a little. I did not mean hire someone to accidentally start a whole telenovela in your dining room." Despite everything, Naomi found herself laughing. A short, exhausted, slightly unhinged laugh, the kind that comes right before crying. Uncle Bayo, sensing an opportunity to lighten the mood even slightly, decided the situation called for reconnaissance of his own. He suggested, loudly, at dinner, in front of everyone, that they hire another actress to secretly watch Vanessa, just to be absolutely certain nobody else was lying. "2 spies are better than 1, he declared confidently, as if this were sound legal strategy and not something he'd invented on the spot. Naomi, exhausted enough to consider almost anything at this point, actually agreed. The second actress, a bubbly woman named Renee who Naomi found through the same casting network, arrived at the house the following afternoon under the guise of being a friend of Vanessa's from acting class. Within an hour, however, Renee had completely misread the situation, taken one look at Uncle Bayo holding court in the living room with his loud opinions and expensive-looking watch, and decided he was a wealthy widower worth pursuing. She began flirting with him relentlessly. Uncle Bayo, who had not received female attention this enthusiastic since approximately 1994, sat up straighter, adjusted his collar, and began speaking in a voice several octaves lower than his natural tone. "I have several properties," he told her grandly, which was technically true if you counted his 2-bedroom house in Sugarland and the storage unit he rented near the highway. By dinner, Uncle Bayo had changed into a blazer nobody had ever seen him wear, slicked his hair back, and started referring to himself as a man of refined taste. Naomi, watching this unfold from the kitchen doorway while nursing a glass of wine and a pounding headache, allowed herself the first genuine laugh she'd had in days. "This family," she muttered, "is completely unraveling in real time." But the comic relief was short-lived, because that same night, alone in her office with the deed spread across her desk and her reading glasses perched low on her nose, Naomi finally noticed something that made her blood run cold. The signatures didn't match. Not Marcus's signature. That was authentic, the same confident curl she'd seen 1,000 times on birthday cards and anniversary notes. It was the notary's signature, and the seal, and 2 of the dates, which contradicted each other by nearly a full week. Naomi sat back in her chair slowly, the pieces of a much larger, much darker puzzle beginning to click into place. Something about this deed wasn't just messy. It was fraudulent. She spent the next 2 days barely sleeping, pulling records from the county clerk's office, cross-referencing notary licenses, calling in favors from colleagues at her firm who owed her from cases she'd carried them through years earlier. What she uncovered stopped her cold in the middle of her own home office at 11 o'clock at night. The house had never belonged to Marcus. Not on paper. Not legally. Not in any way that mattered. 8 years earlier, during a particularly turbulent stretch in Marcus's business dealings, a stretch he described to her at the time as just a rough patch, nothing to worry about, Naomi had quietly purchased their home through a protected family trust set up under her name alone. It had been a precaution, nothing more, the kind of move any smart attorney makes when her husband's finances start looking shaky. She'd never made a big deal of it. She'd never even brought it up again after the rough patch passed. Marcus knew. He had to have known. His name was nowhere on the original paperwork, and a man who built his career reading contracts for a living doesn't simply forget who holds title to his own home. Which meant every conversation he'd had with Vanessa about his house, every proud declaration to his attorney friend, every signature on that fraudulent deed, all of it had been built on a lie he'd been telling himself and everyone around him for years. The transfer to Vanessa was completely, legally worthless. But forging a notary seal wasn't worthless. Falsifying legal documents wasn't worthless. Attempting to transfer property he had no legal claim to, using a woman he'd manipulated into believing his lies, that wasn't a worthless mistake either. That was fraud. That was forgery. Depending on how deep the paperwork trail went, that might even be identity theft. Naomi sat in the glow of her laptop screen, hands trembling, and realized with sickening clarity that her husband hadn't just betrayed their marriage. He had committed actual crimes to do it. Vanessa realized the danger she was in almost as quickly as Naomi did. The morning after Naomi confronted her with the forged notary information, Vanessa found Marcus waiting for her in the kitchen, his usual charm dialed up to a level that felt less like affection and more like a threat wrapped in a smile. "I know you're scared," he said, sliding a cup of coffee toward her she hadn't asked for. "But I can make this easier for both of us. A trip, somewhere far from Houston. New apartment, new city, fresh start. All you have to do is disappear for a while. Let things cool down." Vanessa stared at him, coffee untouched, her stomach twisting into a knot. "You're asking me to run. I'm asking you to protect yourself," Marcus said smoothly. "Because right now, sweetheart, you're a witness to a lot of things that could get complicated if certain paperwork gets certain kinds of attention." The threat, thin as it was wrapped in gentle language, landed exactly as intended. Vanessa understood in that moment that she wasn't just an actress caught in an awkward situation anymore. She was a loose end. That night, alone in the guest room with the door locked, Vanessa did the only thing her instincts told her might save her. She opened the voice memo app on her phone and began recording every conversation Marcus had with her from that point forward, hiding the phone in her cardigan pocket, in her purse, on the kitchen counter angled just right. She captured him offering her hush money. She captured him describing, in careless detail, how he'd falsified paperwork before, not just this time, but before, years earlier, with someone else entirely, a name Vanessa didn't recognize, but made sure to say clearly into the recording so it would be preserved. Every word was a nail in a coffin Marcus was building for himself without even realizing it. The final piece of the puzzle arrived from the most unexpected source imaginable. At a charity dinner Naomi insisted they still attend. Appearances, she reasoned bitterly, still mattered for at least a little while longer. Uncle Bayo accidentally grabbed Marcus's phone off the table instead of his own. The two devices were nearly identical, same case, same size, and in the chaos of the evening, nobody noticed the swap until Uncle Bayo got home and tried to unlock what he thought was his phone with his own passcode. It worked. Marcus, it turned out, had never bothered changing his passcode from the default 4 digits Naomi had once set up for him years earlier during a phone upgrade. What Uncle Bayo found on that phone, scrolling through messages meant purely out of nosy curiosity, made him call Naomi at 11:30 that night, his voice shaking with an urgency she'd never heard from him before. "Naomi," he said, "you need to come to my house right now. Bring your laptop. Bring everything." Years of messages. Years of conversations with other women. Not just Vanessa, but women before her. Women whose names Naomi recognized from charity events and business dinners. Women who had no idea they'd been part of a pattern instead of a genuine connection. Financial records showing luxury gifts purchased with funds Naomi had never approved. Screenshots of forged documents dating back nearly a decade, practice runs, apparently, for exactly the kind of fraud he'd attempted with their house. Marcus hadn't been searching for love in any of these relationships. He had been hunting, carefully, patiently, methodically targeting wealthy or financially stable women, building relationships slowly enough to gain trust, then attempting to access their assets through manipulation, forged paperwork, and outright fraud. Naomi had never been his wife in the way she believed. She had been his biggest, most carefully cultivated target. This is where it gets intense. If you believe Marcus deserves everything that's coming to him, hit that like button right now and drop a comment saying justice before we continue. Naomi didn't cry when she found out. She didn't scream. She sat very still in Uncle Bayo's living room at nearly 1 a.m, staring at a phone full of evidence that rewrote every memory of her marriage into something unrecognizable, and she felt something inside her shift from devastation into something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. Determination. "We're going to end this," she said quietly. "Properly. Publicly. With everyone who's ever trusted him in the room to see it." Uncle Bayo nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to keep pretending you don't know anything," Naomi said. "And I need Vanessa." The two women who had every reason to hate each other met the following afternoon at a coffee shop far from Marcus's usual circles, and for the first time since this entire disaster began, they weren't adversaries. They were allies bound by a shared betrayal. The wife who'd been deceived for years, and the actress who'd nearly become the next casualty in a decade-long pattern of fraud. "I have recordings," Vanessa said, sliding her phone across the table. "Hours of them. Him offering me money to disappear. Him describing the other forged deeds. Everything. I have documents," Naomi said. "The trust paperwork proving I've always owned the house. Bank records showing the fraudulent transfers he attempted with at least 2 other women before you. Messages going back years." Vanessa studied her for a long moment. "What are we going to do with all of it?" Naomi's expression hardened into something that looked, for the first time in weeks, genuinely calm. "We're going to give Marcus exactly what he wants. A celebration. In front of everyone who matters to him." The plan came together over the following days with the precision of a courtroom strategy, because that was exactly what it was. Vanessa played her part flawlessly, telling Marcus she'd thought it over and decided to accept the future he'd promised her. The house, the fresh start, the life he'd painted so convincingly during their brief, manufactured romance. Marcus, thrilled, practically glowing with the kind of arrogant confidence that comes right before a spectacular fall, insisted on throwing an engagement celebration. He invited everyone. Investors who'd trusted him with their money for years. Business partners who'd built deals on his word. Friends who'd stood beside him at church every Sunday. Even his own attorney, the same man who'd unknowingly notarized fraudulent paperwork, came expecting to celebrate. Naomi handled the venue. Vanessa handled Marcus's ego, keeping him distracted and confident right up until the final hour. Uncle Bayo, delighted to finally have an official role in the operation, handled the technical setup, connecting a projector to a laptop loaded with every recording, every document, every piece of evidence they'd gathered. The night of the celebration arrived warm and clear, string lights glowing across the elegant rented ballroom, champagne flowing. Marcus standing at the center of it all in a tailored suit, beaming with pride as he prepared to introduce his future to a room full of people who trusted him completely. "Everyone," he announced, raising his glass, "thank you for being here tonight. This past year hasn't been easy, but sometimes, in the middle of struggle, you find the person who finally sees you clearly." He turned toward Vanessa, who stood beside him in a stunning gown, her expression unreadable, her hand steady around her own champagne glass despite everything churning beneath the surface. "To new beginnings," Marcus said. The lights went out. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the room plunged into darkness, followed immediately by the harsh glow of a projector flickering to life against the far wall. Marcus's own voice filled the ballroom, pulled directly from Vanessa's recordings, offering hush money, describing forged documents, admitting to fraud committed years before this night. Screenshots appeared next, messages to other women, financial records, the trust documents proving the house had never belonged to him at all. The room fell into stunned, horrified silence. Marcus stood frozen at the center of it all, his champagne glass slipping slightly in his hand, watching his entire carefully constructed life dissolve in real time on a screen in front of the very people whose trust had built his reputation. "This is a mistake," he said weakly, his voice barely carrying over the murmurs rippling through the crowd. Someone's manipulated this footage." "It's not manipulated, Marcus," Naomi said, stepping out from the shadows near the back of the room, her voice calm, controlled, devastating in its steadiness. "It's just true." The silence that followed was worse than any shouting could have been. Then, from somewhere near the bar, someone began laughing. A short, disbelieving, almost hysterical laugh. It spread through the room like wildfire, guests turning to each other in stunned amusement and horror, the absurdity and the betrayal colliding into something that could only be processed through nervous, uncomfortable laughter. Marcus stood completely alone in the center of the dance floor, the projector's light washing over his face. Every trace of his practiced charm burned away. If this story has you gripped, comment, "I'm still here," so we know you're locked in. Because the ending is about to hit different. Marcus's composure finally cracked completely. "This is my house," he shouted, lunging toward a nearby table where the original deed sat displayed as part of the evening's evidence, snatching it up and waving it above his head like it still meant something. "I signed for it. It's mine." The room watched in stunned silence as Naomi walked forward, unhurried, and calmly placed a second stack of documents on the table beside him. The original trust paperwork. Her name. Her signature. Dates predating their entire marriage by years. Every attorney in that room, and there were several colleagues and business associates who'd come expecting champagne and congratulations, understood immediately what they were looking at. Marcus had never owned the house he'd tried to give away. He had never had the legal authority to sign it over to anyone. Every fraudulent document he'd created, every forged notary seal, every carefully constructed lie had accomplished nothing except exposing himself completely, in front of everyone whose trust he'd spent years building. His attorney, pale and visibly shaken, quietly set down his drink and slipped toward the exit without a word. Investors who'd trusted him with millions began murmuring to each other, already calculating the damage, already distancing themselves from a name that was about to become radioactive across every real estate circle in Houston. Friends who'd known him for over a decade simply stared, unable to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the one standing exposed under the harsh light of the projector. The doors to the ballroom opened, and 2 police officers stepped inside, having been quietly notified earlier that evening by Naomi's attorney, who'd reviewed the forged documents and recorded confessions and determined, with professional certainty, that what they were looking at constituted multiple felonies. Marcus's eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for someone, anyone, who might still be on his side. He found no one. Not the investors who were already pulling out their phones to call their own lawyers. Not the friends who'd quietly turned their backs. Not Vanessa, who stood several feet away, finally free of the role she'd been forced to play, watching with an expression that held more pity than anger. Not even his own attorney, already gone. "Naomi," Marcus said, his voice cracking, all the charm finally, completely stripped away. "Please, we can fix this." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. The man she'd married, the man she'd built a life alongside, the man who'd spent years quietly, methodically betraying her while wearing the mask of a devoted husband. "You didn't destroy this marriage because of me," she said quietly. "You destroyed it because greed was always going to matter more to you than love ever did." The officers approached. Marcus's protests grew louder, more desperate, but the outcome had already been decided the moment he'd chosen forged paperwork over honesty, years and years before this night ever arrived. As he was led out of the ballroom in handcuffs, the room remained utterly silent, watching the collapse of a reputation built entirely on lies. In the weeks that followed, Marcus lost everything that had once defined him. His marriage, formally and irreversibly ended, the divorce proceeding quickly given the overwhelming evidence of fraud that made any contest laughably impossible. His business reputation, destroyed the moment word spread through Houston's real estate circles about the fraudulent documents and the pattern of manipulation stretching back nearly a decade. His investors, who filed their own complaints once they realized how many other deals might have involved similarly questionable paperwork. His luxury lifestyle, seized and liquidated as restitution proceedings began. And his freedom, pending trial on multiple counts of forgery, fraud, and attempted property theft. Vanessa received compensation for her role in exposing the fraud, a small but meaningful settlement that finally allowed her to do something she'd dreamed about for years but never had the resources to pursue. She opened a small acting academy in Midtown Houston, teaching aspiring performers the craft she loved, the one that had nearly gotten her entangled in a felony case before ultimately becoming the thing that helped expose it. At the academy's opening, surrounded by students eager to learn, she laughed when a reporter asked about the strange story that had briefly made headlines across local news. "The best performance of my life," she said, shaking her head with a wry smile, "almost sent me to prison." Naomi rebuilt slowly, deliberately, the same way she approached everything in her life. She kept the house, the trust protecting it exactly as it had for years, though she eventually sold it and moved into a smaller home downtown, closer to her office, further from the memories that had once filled every room with warmth she now understood had never been entirely real. She stopped testing people after that. Loyalty tests, she realized, could never actually create trust. They could only ever confirm suspicion that already existed. Real trust, she decided, had to be built differently, through consistency and time, not through elaborate schemes designed to catch someone in a lie. She simply watched people's actions now, patiently, the way she should have from the beginning. Uncle Bayo, for his part, remained deeply proud of his role in the entire saga, retelling the story at every family gathering with increasingly exaggerated details until his version bore only a passing resemblance to what had actually happened. "I told her," he'd say to anyone who'd listen, "hire an actress instead of a detective. And look what happened. A whole criminal was exposed because of my brilliant idea." "Uncle," Naomi said one evening, sitting across from him at his kitchen table over bowls of pepper soup, "your advice nearly ruined my life." He shrugged, entirely unbothered, a satisfied smile spreading across his weathered face. "Yes, but look how beautifully the truth introduced itself in the end." Naomi laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and unguarded, the first one that had felt completely genuine in months. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy a life. Sometimes it simply exposes the people who were quietly stealing pieces of it all along, one small lie at a time, until the foundation could no longer hold the weight of everything built on top of it. The truth has a strange habit of arriving in disguise, wearing a red dress at a rooftop lounge, hiding in a stack of forged documents, waiting patiently inside a phone accidentally swapped at a charity dinner. But once it finally arrives, fully and completely, no performance, no matter how convincing, can hide it forever. Naomi learned that lesson at the highest possible cost. But she walked away from it with something Marcus never had in the first place. Despite all his charm, all his confidence, all his carefully rehearsed lines, she walked away with the truth. And for the first time in years, that truth finally belonged entirely to her. So here's what this story really comes down to. A marriage built on charm instead of honesty will eventually collapse under its own weight, no matter how convincing the performance looks from the outside. A loyalty test can reveal a lie, but it can never repair the trust that was already broken long before the test began. And greed, when it finally gets what it wants, rarely brings the freedom it promised. It usually brings exactly the opposite. Naomi didn't lose her home or her marriage because she tested her husband. She simply discovered, in the most painful way possible, who he had already become. And Vanessa's story is a quiet reminder that sometimes the people we hire to play a role end up teaching us the most about what's real. Thank you so much for staying with this story all the way to the end. We poured so much heart into bringing Naomi, Marcus, Vanessa, and Uncle Bayo to life, and we hope it kept you glued to your screen exactly the way we intended. Now we want to hear from you. What part of this story did you enjoy the most? Was it Uncle Bayo's chaotic wisdom, the twist with the trust documents, or the moment Marcus finally got exposed in that ballroom? Drop your favorite moment in the comments below, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next cinematic story full of suspense, humor, justice, and unforgettable lessons. Asterisk asterisk. And if you think this twist was unbelievable, wait until you hear the next story.